so it's easier. Awesome. So I got Steve Lagana here, the president of First Heritage Mortgage, former MMBBA president, correct?
Yep.
Wow. Steve,
2017 to 2018.
whew, those were great years, right? Back when you actually had to do something, unlike Tim
Yeah,
Whittier.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Um, well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. We've started this podcast series with MBA, MW, trying to get, great leaders in our industry in front of our members to kind of share their stories of, obviously their work with the association, but also mortgage banking as a whole. And I couldn't think of a better person to sit down with us today and kind of share some of those thoughts.
Okay. I'd be glad to. So, so what do you want to talk about, Jake?
I want to talk about all kinds of stuff. Steve, how'd you get in the business?
I got in the business in 1990, and at the time I was working as an engineer and
Hmm.
bartending part-time in the evenings. And so I was bartending in College Park where I went to school. And the one night, me and a friend of mine, Jim Stakem, he looks at me and he's also working full-time as an engineer. He's like, "Do you want to work tonight?" And it was the summer of 1990. And I was like, "Not really. I'm tired." And so at the time, my girlfriend and her roommates were having a cake party. That tells you how long ago it was. We told the manager, "We're going right up the street. Call us on this phone line if you need us to come back and work." But so the structure was you'd have six people scheduled, but probably only four would work. So we put ourselves at the back of the rotation. We went
Hmm.
to the party and I'm pouring him a beer out of the keg. And he looks at me and he says, "You should get in the mortgage business." And I said, "Really? Why do you say that?" He goes, "You'd be really good at it." I said, "Really?" I said, "Why aren't you in it?" He goes, "That's not for me." He said, "But you'd be good at it." And so he introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Jack Deacon, who introduced me to Mike Twigg, who is my mentor, I think in business. And I went to work for Twig in October of 1990, and sort of the rest is history.
Wow,
Just a
35 years
random
later.
circumstance.
And which were you at? You weren't the VU. What bar were you working at?
Santa Fe.
Santa Fe.
Yep.
Oh man, as a fellow Maryland alum, I had some great times at Santa Fe.
Yeah.
It was a great place.
Yeah. I put myself through school as the general manager of Santa Fe. And a lot of the older guys and ladies, when we'd go to get our normal job, we'd work Thursday and Saturday nights.
Sure.
So it was summertime, it was a Saturday night, and this guy, Jim Steak looks at me and he's like, "I don't want to work tonight." I said, "Either do I." So who
It all
knows if
worked
we'd have
out.
had that conversation if we'd have gone to work that night. So but literally
That's a
just sitting there
lesson.
pouring him a beer and he's like, "You ought to get in the mortgage business."
Sounds like the lesson is just skip work and good things happen.
Yeah,
You find your career.
exactly. Yeah,
So you just
100%.
mentioned Twig. I Twig is a MBA MW Hall of Famer.
Uh-huh.
It feels like Twig is like the Sean Kemp of mortgage banking. He's got children everywhere. Everywhere
Yeah,
you look, someone said they worked under Twig.
yeah.
Twig was their mentor. Tell me about Twig. Tell me about your experience working under him.
So Mike was one of those guys that it was everything was he had great feel for the right thing to say at the right time, when to hold somebody accountable, when to put his arm around them. He was not the biggest on details
Sure.
and things like that, but he had such a great instinct for for people and culture, and he believed that if you had a great environment, the success would follow that.
Hmm.
And he kept it light. Again, he just knew the right. He knew when to slap you on the wrist and when to put his arm around you. And he was equally good at both. Uh, Great instinct for people that would be successful in this.
Sure.
And he really was, whatever the opposite of micromanaging is, that's him. Uh, when he hired me to be a manager, he said, "Look, you can do as many loans as you want, but you're going to manage first. So, you take care of the branch first, and between 5 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock, you can originate all you want." And he just said, "Look, you're going to run this place, run it in however you think is appropriate, but you own it." And he was very big on personal accountability. Uh, he would not hire people with experience because he didn't want to inherit other people's problems. In the time I worked for him, the only person he hired with experience was Bob Devlin. uh,
Okay.
who he had worked with earlier, who where we were was a company called First Washington. First Washington had hired Bob. Bob had left, so he figured bringing him back wasn't like hiring somebody that hadn't started with him. So really just we hired and trained people, taught people, hired responsible people, and held them accountable. It wasn't complicated. It
Well, it
was
sounds like it worked out well.
yeah. Yeah, he has quite a track record, no doubt.
As many people probably know, I worked for Steve for many years at First Home Mortgage.
Yeah.
Steve was and still is one of the biggest mentors in my career. And I definitely remember an aha moment about 3 years into my career,
Hmm.
where it was like a January, I think it was 2015, and I had three loans in process, and all three were just absolute train wrecks. I was missing bank statements. I didn't have, W-2, whatever I needed for the file. I
Yeah.
wasn't even close to having it.
Yeah.
And all three loans needed an exception. And I called Steve, tail between my legs every time. And after the third one, I said, Steve, thank you so much. Like, if there's anything I do, like, just
Yeah.
let me know. And you're like, yeah, there's something you can do. You can get better at your job, so you just don't have to keep calling me. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, wow, he's right. Like, maybe I should
Yeah.
actually be a professional.
Yeah. I remember saying, yeah, there is something you could do is just never need to call me. And I think I followed that up by saying, I said, because by the time you called me, we all lost.
It's
By the time
true.
you get me involved, it's too late. Uh, and so you were like, you got it. And you almost never had to call me again.
No, no. I mean, there were some times here or there, but yeah, for the most part, it was this really like revelation of like, wow, if you're really good at this on the back end, on the processing, the ops, you manage your life, right? Like I used to have so much stomach acid, indigestion, heartburn because I
Yeah.
couldn't sleep at night because I was like, oh, this loan's not going to close. I'm going to have to call the client, the agent,
Yeah.
all of this. And I'm like, if I just did a better job up front with the application,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have any of these problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all had those aha moments at one point in our career, so where you just make a commitment to be better, and never have anything that comes as a surprise. It's your transaction. Ramos, one of our friends, always says, uh, "You're the quarterback. You have the most to gain or lose. You know the most
Sure.
about it. Make it happen." And so, of course, he started with me too. So, but yeah, I remember that day clearly. I was sitting in the old Greenbelt office. I just had a
Yeah.
meeting with the Greenbelt group, and I was borrowing somebody's office. Maybe it was Halbert's. And I remember you said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I was like, if you want to thank me, don't call me. Yeah,
Good perspective. That's good management.
that's right.
And there was another one where yeah, I remember telling you about this and like, what? And I was complaining about something, and you were like, Jake, when you're late, all the lights are red. I was like, what the hell does that mean? But it's true. It's like when you're behind, when you're playing catch up, you always run into another problem. When your
Yeah,
loan's late getting into
when
underwriting,
you leave
yeah,
late for the appointment, all the lights are red. When you
right.
leave early, the lights are green.
Yeah, and I remember that every now and then some of my buddies will mess with me and they'll like tell me that. And I'm like, it's true. Like, if you're always playing catch up, you're always going to have
Yeah,
another issue in your file.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Steve-isms.
Yeah. It's we used to say there's three problems in every loan, find them,
It's true.
you
Got to
know?
find them before they find you.
Exactly.
I always tell people there's three types of people. There's problem creators, there's problem solvers, and there's problem preventers.
Yeah.
Problem preventers are who you want to be.
Yeah. That's right. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. So you mentioned management, right?
That,
So you were a very successful originator in Prince George's County for a long time. You got into management at a young age. How old were you start managing the Greenbelt office?
sales manager at 27, branch manager at 29.
Okay, young. What led you to management? What made you think you'd be good at management, or did you get pushed into it?
Twig said I was the number one loan officer at that small company, First Washington. There was only like 40 loan officers. It
Sure.
wasn't like there was 400, but and he said, obviously you're a very proficient originator. He said, but I think you'll be a better manager.
Sure.
And so that sort of started it. When he got elevated, I ended up getting the Greenbelt branch. And what was interesting about that morning is got everybody together and I said, there was a prolonged period. We were owned by First National Bank of Maryland at the time, and because they were bank owned, you had to interview with certain people at the bank and as
Sure.
well as the executives at the mortgage company. And so it was understood that I was going to end up getting the job, but we all still went through the process. And I got everybody together and I said, look, I said, nobody here came to work for me. So therefore, if you don't work for me and you don't want to work for me, I'm not going to be offended. I said, but I'm not Mike Twigg and I can't be Mike Twigg and I'm not going to try to be Mike Twigg.
Mhm.
Mike believed that if you had a great environment, success would follow. I believe that if we execute and we are great, then we're going to have a lot of fun.
Sure.
Said it's just the way I'm wired versus the way he's wired. And everybody stuck together and we kind of changed it more in a way that I could manage it. Because Twig was a genius at managing any circumstance. He was older than me, more mature than me, obviously, and he was a genius at managing chaos.
Hmm.
Um, and I just said, I can't manage chaos. I'm not, you know me, I'm not wired that way.
Sure.
I need order and discipline and process. So uh, probably the smartest thing I ever did is get everybody together and say, I'm not him. I can't be him. I'm not going to try to be him. Uh, but if you're patient, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to grow. And we did.
I went to lunch with Twig, I don't know, 6 months ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. And the thing that just it impressed on me was like emotional intelligence is what I
Yes.
came away with. Like he just had like off the charts emotional intelligence.
Genius.
Yeah. And
Ge-
he was asking me questions about the mortgage business and like what's changed this. And like we got through it and it was like, well, sounds like nothing's changed from when you started doing it. It's all the same problems. Technology might be a little bit different, but it's the same
Yeah.
personalities, issues, all that.
Yeah. It moves faster, but it
Hmm.
really hasn't changed all that much. It does move faster. I
Sure.
mean, information, everything moves with greater velocity now. So it's just, and you have to be a little faster, but fundamentally, the same principles are the same. Like when people say you haven't originated a loan in forever, I said that's true, but the fundamentals of top performers and what they do hasn't changed.
I
You
agree.
know, so it's the top originators in 1995 do almost the same things as the top originators 30 years later.
Yeah,
Same
they might
banking
not be
solution.
staying next to the fax machine with their with the trifold paper with the
Correct.
credit reports.
Correct. But they get in early, they stay late, and
Yeah.
they handle their problems in a similar fashion. Just took longer back then.
Yeah, I remember early in my career we were talking and you were like, if you think this is a 9 to 5 being successful, then you got a hard reality coming your way.
Yeah, yeah. It's just not.
No, I mean, if you want to be an elite producer, it's just hours. It's all it is. You can't just get there going, working 6, 8 hours a day.
Yeah, I used to say, if you look at the average number of hours worked, that's not this.
No.
At 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you got into management, you've obviously grown. You've kept going up. You're president at First Home Mortgage, now at First Heritage. What when you look at people looking to make the jump from high producer with any level of production to becoming a manager, what kind of skills do you look for that are different in managers versus originators? What overlap do you see?
So, most great originators are super competitive. They're good listeners.
Hmm.
They'll battle for a loan. Uh, and a lot of that translates. What I've said to people here, because we're growing pretty quickly here, I've said the transition for you is difficult because you go from being the most important person in the room to
Sure.
identifying the most important people in the room and supporting them, putting
Yeah.
them, so you want people that are givers with their time. They're in it for more than their development, they're in it for the team's development. What I've said about managing in general, sort of the ticket into management, like the ticket into the game is I want people that are incredibly hardworking. They should work as hard as everybody that works for them. And you know that about me. I always prided myself on that.
Oh yeah.
Honest, even when it's hard,
Sure.
incredibly honest and knowledgeable. You got to know the business. If you get those three things right, it gets you into the arena and an opportunity to compete at that level. But I think you have to have those three just as a starting point, at least for me. I don't just putting other people first. So the way we communicate here at this company since I've gotten here is I said, I basically want two things. I want excellence in everything we do, and we will live and apply the golden rule in all of our experiences. And if we treat everybody the way we want to be treated and we pursue excellence, that's a great foundation. That's a great starting point, right? That would lead you to being a hard, I have to work as hard as everybody that works here. I have to be honest, even when it's hard to be honest. And I have to know the business, right? I have to be a student of this, right? Because otherwise, why would you come to me if I don't really know this business? So I try to communicate that to our leadership and say, you got to know you got to know your stuff. You got to work as hard as they do, and they deserve your honesty. And even when it's really hard to say some things that are, not the most pleasant, like, hey, you got to do better. So
Sure.
that's sort of the foundation of it. I try not to. You've been around me enough to know that I don't overthink stuff. I'm not all that complicated. Um, just keep it really simple. And too many people in our business they get into management for an override and for a title,
Hmm.
or they're going to be the team lead or whatever. And
Sure.
you want to find people that it's not about them. They know it's about everybody else. And so it's hard because, the most great originators, um, they got that way because there's a little selfishness in them, and I
Hmm.
get that too. I certainly understand that, that's part of it.
I know, you were always so good and still are at putting like basically the org chart upside down, right? So this mindset, I remember it like awards trips and stuff like that. You would go out of your way constantly to talk to everyone there. It's not like,
Yeah.
people should line up to talk to the presidents. You were going out of your way, and you pressed on me early on when I started to grow a team was, you work for your team. They don't work for you,
Yeah, it's
right?
servant leadership,
Yeah.
right? Would be the cliche line is servant leadership. And so, my old assistant, Savannah, she said something to me that very early on, and she worked for me for 13 or 14 years, the entire time I was president of First Home, certainly. And she said to me, what I notice about you is you speak to the janitor the same way you speak to Chase Warehouse,
Sure.
who's loaning us $150 million. And I said, I worked very hard at that. Um, I said, it's effort, right? Um, and similarly, when I go into the coffee room, I'm speaking to the receptionist or one of the admins the same way I'm speaking to the number one producer or Tim, who's running the biggest branch, whatever it is.
Sure.
Um, everybody's equally important in terms of what they contribute to the company. Obviously, the biggest producers and the biggest managers are economically more important, but you can treat everybody the same and understand you're there to make everybody's lives better. And then as a result of that, you're going to probably live a better life.
I
You
would
know?
say that's my ultimate litmus test on people is like how they treat servers at restaurants and
Yeah.
like people that in theory could do nothing for them,
Yeah.
right? Like how you just interact with random people. If you're just like a prick for no reason, it's like, come on, I really don't want to deal with
Yeah.
you.
So I used to say that about your old group when we were at First Home, because a lot of people would say, and particularly at our club, what makes those guys so successful? And I would always use Scott as an example. I said, go have dinner with Scott and watch how he engages the bartender or the server.
Hmm.
He looks him right in the eye. It's please, it's thank you.
Yeah.
He's impossibly polite. He's generous. You see him on the golf course and he's having fun and he's drinking beer, whatever. But
Yeah.
in the workspace, between the time we go to work and the time we leave, I said, just go have dinner with him. And all those guys, I said they're all that way. They're all friendly, they're polite, they're generous with their time, with whatever it is. And so yeah, I said I think that's a big part of it. I used to point that out about you, Scott, Alex, Ryan, the whole group. And it's true.
Yeah. We had a good group going there.
Yeah.
Uh, so we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier with Twig, but you've been in this business for 35 years. What's changed and what stayed the same? I mean, you mentioned a lot of the principles. What
Yeah.
particular have you noticed?
Um, the more that we feel like it changes, I could probably argue that it really hasn't.
Sure.
The loan officer and the good loan officers have become more important, and that's probably justified, again, both economically and other. I think the industry still doesn't invest in itself. It never really did. Nobody's willing to, take resources and say, I'm going to hire and train for all positions in a company, which I think they should. Um, in those ways, I don't think it's changed much. It certainly moves faster. But, you know, I started in 1990. If you took the same person who started in 2000 or 2010, would I have been successful? I think so. And the basics of it really haven't changed all that much. Um, the fundamentals are the same. It's Twig used to say to us all the time, he'd say, I could take my 12 managers. We had a thing called D12, and they were Twig's 12 managers. He said, I could take you 12 into any business and we would be fine. We happen to do mortgage, but it could be stocks, cars, shoes, whatever, whatever the case, restaurants. He said we'd be fine because leadership's leadership, and that doesn't really change. I think origination in sales hasn't really changed all that much. It You don't have to be great with technology to succeed at this. I would be evidence of that. But if you are today, it makes it easier, no doubt.
Sure.
Um, but the more I hear people say it's changed, I did all the same things that you guys do today in terms of connecting with top people and whether
Sure.
it's lunch, coffee, whatever. Um, so in that way, it hasn't. It's still about relationships. It just moves a lot faster.
Yeah.
You go from 45 to 60-day closings to, 10 to 20 days, right? And
Yeah.
and it still has to be early and it still has to be right. So yeah, it's just faster.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely we feel that speed, and I feel like the Mid Atlantic, especially our market
Uh-huh.
compared to other markets in the country, speed is something that's just noticeably different here.
Yeah, if there's a handful of markets that I've experienced in the country, having traveled a little more than say you have.
Sure.
Boston's that way, Chicago's that way, parts of California are that way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Northwest Washington, even more than the Maryland side, you got to be very fast.
Yeah.
Right? It moves very quickly, and the level of expectation of service is extraordinarily high all the time, as it should be.
So you're talking about the expectation of service and these standards. What kind of standards do you hold, your loan officers to as the president?
So I'm a big believer in big data, and big data tends to be right.
Hmm.
And so our goals here are to get to a 5-day clear to close on average,
Sure.
made more complex by the fact that 45% of our business is from the builder, and they can dictate whether it's a spec home or it's a short fuse closing, it's got to go quick. Versus some things will be 3 months. So
Sure.
your build cycle 75 days on average, but there's some 6 months in there and there's some 2 weeks.
Right.
Um, so so more complex made by that relationship and having to service them, but really clear to close. So what I've tried to teach everybody here in my 18 months here is, we're going to rely on big data. We're going to measure everything. And when you build reports, and we use some of the old reports just a little different than we use the first home. And
Sure.
Tim Whittier was a big architect of that stuff. Um, you build them left to right, but you read them right to left. In other
Hmm.
words, these three numbers here are the most important. And as long as you're happy here, this means less. So for me, are we disclosing the loan correctly and on time, when it's supposed to be incorrectly? Are we pricing within a reasonable amount of what we think we need to run this business? And are we clearing loans 5 days prior to closing? And if those three things are good, I don't care as much about what's happening on the left side of the report. If you can imagine, reading these columns, because does it matter to me if you took whatever days to turn it in and it was approved quicker and cleared quicker, or if you turned it immediately, it was a little longer to get to underwrite. It doesn't matter to me as long as it's cleared more than 5 days prior to closing. And the goal is to one day be 8 days on average. And
And for those listening, we're talking like app to disclosure, disclosure to processing, processing to
yeah,
underwriting,
yeah,
underwriting to initial approval,
that's
underwriting
right.
final
So
approval. Yeah.
yeah, so at first time, and here we're on Encompass, and Encompass is a milestones-based system,
Sure.
and it's really best used when you set your milestones and you measure your milestones,
Hmm.
and that data leads you to certain conclusions, right?
Sure.
So with you and like you guys were the fastest in the company,
Hmm.
and that made sense because you're very experienced, you're very talented, and you had a little cleaner slice of business, unless you had a
Sure.
complicated self-employed situation or condo. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I got a Prince George's County branch or the Baltimore City branch, I think things are going to be a little slower. Now, in exchange for that, I'm going to get greater margin, right? Because
Hmm.
of product mix, et cetera. So I like to build things and manage the things where I can look at a set of reports in very condensed, quick time and say, this all makes sense to me. That branch is functioning the way I think it should, based on the data. not
Hmm.
what a closer or an underwriter said about the manager and their complaint, because they're just reacting to what happened yesterday. The
Yeah,
data which leads you to the better conclusions and better, structure of your business.
it's not just anecdotes.
No, no,
Okay, I
no.
like
I mean,
that.
lots of people do. Look, this is emotional business, and sales and ops have known once or twice to have a little friction there, a little headbutting, and but that's what happened yesterday. That's not every day. That's not every loan. So I think I used to say to you guys a lot, once isn't a pattern.
Hmm.
It's just what's really happened across the month, and then let's see where our opportunities are for improvement.
I know myself and our group, we always like working with you and for you because this idea of as a former originator,
Yeah,
you had the originator's mindset, right? I
yeah,
mean, we've always talked about your experience at some of these banks. When the banks got taken over by bank people, things got messed up,
yeah.
right? It's very different when you have originators who have done this. They've been on the street, they've been out there talking to agents. They have a different perspective than someone who's all theoretical.
Yeah, so I have told people here, I left the street, but the street doesn't leave you. Like I know what it's like to lose a loan. I know what
Right.
it's like for underwriters to over condition loans and don't really have a justification for it. And then they give you the old, well, that's what the
I
investors
feel.
want. Yeah, yeah, or that, whatever. I got dinged for that before. No, you didn't. It's just it's so I get all that and I get the frustration of it, having to pick up the phone. So that would inform a lot of my decision making, and so we know the hardest part of the business is getting it.
Sure.
And but equally so, we got to finish the sentence, right? Finish the sentence by saying, so when you get it, you should really take great care of it, right? Because it's so hard to get, right? You should treat it as such. I think a lot of people just stop with the hardest part of the business is getting it. So help the loan officer out. I just think we should finish the sentence. So take great care of it. So and everybody would know that has ever worked for me. I can be hard on loan officers. I
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
look,
I can
you'd
be
set a
very
high
demanding.
standard.
Yeah, yeah. You're
Well,
the
I mean,
quarterback.
yeah, look, if you're going to hold the processors, the closers, the underwriters accountable, it's like, well, the buck stops with you as the originator,
Yeah.
right? If it's the hardest thing to do is get it when you get compensated the most, well, then you should do the best job.
Yeah, we had some circumstances here where the loan officers would complain about the underwriter. I'm like, but you don't know the rule either. How does that work? Well, they're supposed to. Yeah, and so are you.
Yeah.
You got product guides too.
Yeah, it's true.
So
The more you know, the easier it is.
yeah. Yeah, that Ramis has joined us here, and he started with me many, many years ago when he was a kid. We were all kids, and he said he always tells everybody, Steve comes at this from a perspective of knowledge is power. You know,
It's just, I can't understand why someone would want to get in this business and they just want to be siloed in this one little aspect of, I just make calls, I just do this, I don't learn. That's the processor's job or that's the underwriter's job. You should know everything. Your job should be, I could do everyone's job. So that way you are getting ahead of problems and issues.
so I was in an office meeting, and I take the guy that's our EVP of business development with me. So we go out and we'll do office visits and meetings, and we're talking. And one of the topics comes up of the way the question was posed was, can you have the processors? I just kind of almost said, what can I do for you guys to make your life better? And they said, can you have the processors send out the approval letter the day it's approved? And I was like, sure, I can do that. I go, but why is that necessary? Why is that like a necessary thing? And they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, just pick up the phone and call the borrower.
Right.
I said, and congratulate them and talk about the conditions and apologize for having not anticipated them. And then call the sales agent, call the listing agent and tell everybody where we are. I said, that's going to be done. That can be done in 30 minutes after you got the approval versus, the mail might take a week to get there and they're not going to understand what the conditions are anyway. And so they looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, no, I was like, and we happened to be one of my offices that was very near where I used to originate. I said, you were competing with a guy like me that was right down there, and I'm calling my borrower and I'm getting everything. I'm being proactive and calling the agents and I'm working on other deals. And you're waiting a week to 10 days for somebody to call you about their approval letter. I think it makes no sense. I said,
Yeah.
you'll lose to me. And this guy, our EVP says, what Steve's trying to say, guys, is we have substituted our convenience for best practice. And that is rampant in our business.
Sure.
We have convinced ourselves that every customer wants to apply online, and that's not true. right?
Yeah.
The average first-time buyer in the country is now 40 years old. Our average applicant's 47 years old. Some of them don't have access to that and would prefer to do it by phone. Give them a
Yeah.
choice. I've always advocated for choice, but we've substituted best practice, convenience for best practice, and it's just not. And that is rampant. A lot of this, a lot of that's their job or whatever. And so it's one of the things that I think we have a challenge as an industry is get back to basics. Pick up the phone.
I know if I ever want to get under your skin, I'll just say, well, Steve, that's not the highest and best use of my time.
Yeah, yeah. Since when is taking care of somebody that's entrusted you with a very important thing not the highest and best use of your time? When you can
That always gets you
explain that
going.
to me,
Yeah.
yeah, besides like you don't think it's the highest and best use of your time, but your customer does,
Yeah.
so that used to drive me crazy. It's like, says who? And where's
Yeah.
that even come from? They're your customer. I
Yeah.
don't, look, I used to have this conversation in the early days of the online stuff. And it's like, as long as you understand when you send a link to somebody, you look like everybody else. You're now you've whatever advantage you had, you just gave away. And
Sure.
you just gave your most important responsibility to take a great application to the least qualified person to take an application. And I said, I'll evidence this way. Go ask any one of your friends what their gross monthly income is, and they'll look at you like you have three heads. And then throw in for mortgage qualifying purposes. They don't know.
Sure.
So you're having them fill something out because it saves you 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you want. But you should give people choices, I think.
Choice works.
Yeah. Choice works.
Um,
31 flavors of ice cream.
of course. All right. So you served, we talked about this earlier, as the president of MMBBA.
Yes. Yes.
What led you to leading in the Mortgage Bankers Association for Maryland?
So that's an interesting sort of circumstance because it must have been 3 years prior to being president. So I was president in 17, 18. So that means in 15, 16, a guy named Rich Green called me. He's with Presidential now, and he was very involved in the association. And he and I had worked together at National City. And I got to know Rich, even though he wasn't in my group, because National City had lots of different brands. He was in the Eastern Mortgage Services group, Michael Carr and Rich Becker and those guys. And I met him because it seemed like every time we went on an award trip, he and I were on the same flight. Or anytime we went on a manager's day, it was one of those things like, hey,
Yeah.
whatever the reason, I guess we live close to each other, but there's a lot of different times you could leave, and maybe neither of us extended on our trips, whatever. We're always on the same flight. So I got to know him pretty well. And he called me one day and he said, will you get involved in the association? I said, I have to ask, our chairman, because my contract is very specific and it says anything outside of first home mortgage, I need approval for. And I said, I'm sure they'll say, okay, but he said, well, look, we're going to make it easy for you. You're not going to be on the board. He goes, we're going to immediately put you on the ladder and you're going to skip secretary. So you're going to become the treasurer. So you'll be president in 3 years and then immediate past president. And then if you want to stay on the board, you can serve on the board. And that's what I did. I ended up being a part of it for 8 years. So it was as simple as that. I felt like it was time to give back because we didn't have anybody at First Home that had served in a while. Bill Heffernan previously had been president of the association, but he hadn't served in a while. And we didn't have anybody that was contributing. And I didn't think that was right. We were the number one lender in the state by a lot and using probably a lot of the work that the association did. And we really weren't giving back beyond being a member
Sure.
and paying our dues. So I just thought it was the right time. And it turned out to be one of the more rewarding experiences of my career. I've made some great friendships, really people that I'm close to today, exchange information, very helpful. So yeah, it was kind of, he just called me out of the blue and he got me probably on the right day where I was like, it's probably time for me to give back and do our part.
Similar story, kind of how I got started, because I got a call from you one day
Yeah.
in 2019, and you voluntold me to start working on the MARC convention, which
Yeah.
was the MMBBA and MBAMW's
Yeah.
joint conference. And it
Yeah.
was like, all right, you're going to start doing this. I was like, okay. And then
I
COVID delayed it and
remember it
delayed it.
differently. I remember you begging me to be a part of
Oh,
it.
yeah,
And I
sure,
said, well,
sure.
we have like this agenda committee that might need somebody. So yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, so a similar type thing is just, and I think the more you participate and contribute, the more you get out of it. It's one of those deals.
Sure.
Uh, and so it was great. I mean, I have to this day, I have 4 or 5 really close friendships, including Ellen,
Hmm.
from that board. That's how I
Yeah.
met, whether it's Corey Galinsky or Frank Dana. Got to know Sarah Graybars a lot better. Ellen certainly, um, Dennis Sullivan, and others. But Dennis and I went through. He was president, I was VP,
Yeah.
and Corey was our. So we were the ladder together. So you always remember that group. But yeah, yeah, a lot of great friendships and business relationships from that.
Yeah, I always get asked by people like, why are you involved or why should I get involved? And it really is, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The more you give, the more you get out of these associations, right? This idea of, being a part of setting the tone, working on, the mission for these organizations and the networking and, all this you get done. It is very rewarding.
It's there's a recently I read a quote, and I don't it was somehow on my phone I get this quote of the day thing,
Hmm.
and it's like always like a Winston Churchill or a Abe Lincoln, whatever,
Sure.
and it goes something like this. It says, "What we get for working is how we live, um, or it allows us to live. What we give is how we live." It's one of those things, and when you give back, you get more out of it than you think and anticipate. And certainly that group, I think that was pervasive in our group, and it was again, it was. I can remember every third Thursday of the 9 months besides the summer, it would be Corey, Frank, Ellen, Steve, Sarah Graybars, Dennis, and we would have our board meeting. We'd go to dinner, and we would
Sure.
spend the better part of the evening together, and just it was fun, but it was good for the association because we all gave a lot to the association, raised a lot of money, a lot of
Mhm.
awareness. And I think did some things legislatively within the state that were valuable. I think we always hit the mark on that too. So on
I
our
love it.
we grew, I think
Yeah.
journey, yeah.
You can keep
Um,
naming. There's so many.
yeah.
Well, this has been great, Steve. Any final words of wisdom or anything you want to share with our group?
No, I think that I think what you're doing and hopefully people understand that these associations are really important,
Hmm.
that our national association is very important. And when you look at issues that are important to customers and consumers at the national level, whether it was trigger leads, whether it's the cost of credit reports now, whether
Yeah,
it's the cost of housing and
sure.
all these things that are around affordability. Uh, our National Association is really important. And then when you get to local issues, um, again, whether it's charity, education, legislative, there's important things that happen or what might happen that would be harmful to us if we don't have people. So every Monday during session in Maryland, we have a guy named Dennis Rasmussen who walks everybody through all the legislative matters that could affect the industry. And this is important stuff. It's important stuff that affects people in buying in Maryland or doing business in Maryland. So the only thing I'd say about the association and the work it does, it is important. It can be fun. I think everybody should go in respecting the fact that it's not about their individual growth. It's about supporting something that we all need.
Hmm.
You could argue, do you need MW and Maryland? Should that be one? And I know that you've had those conversations. They're separate from this because they both do important work. And whether it's again educating our members or the charitable opportunities or the legislative piece, which is really important.
Sure.
It's all important. So to at least have somebody from every company involved at the base level, meaning the committees are important, the conferences are important.
Sure.
It exists and it needs to exist for a reason. And the financial health and well-being requires participation and member activity. So um, I've said I'm sure you and I talked about this because you're very involved. Tim was president, obviously. for MW. You'll get way more out of it than whatever you put into it.
Yeah,
And so hopefully we can continue to grow these things. We got through some tough times, obviously, the last couple of years, and I think we're
sure.
sort of on the upswing. So the events seem to be good and well attended. So yeah, I mean, what you're doing is important, and uh, it needs to continue.
We're just going to take this interview of you and send it out to everyone to get them more involved. This is going to be our
Well, I
marketing
mean,
push.
it's interesting. And you've seen this, right?
Hmm.
You if you just said to somebody, mark the event on your calendar and go, and
Yes.
don't give yourself a reason to not go. So one of my things, besides like you said, all you have to do to get me going is say it's not the highest, but it's best use of my time. My other pet peeve is we all have triggers, right? That
Yeah.
get us going. My other one is when people cancel appointments.
Ooh, yeah.
I cannot tolerate that. So there have been times where I'll have a dinner schedule, and it could be a correspondent, an MI, whatever, and I'll get offered. I remember one time I got offered, you're a Wizards fan, I got offered, Steph Curry was in town, I got offered courtside seats.
Yeah.
I love Steph Curry. I love basketball in general. And I had a dinner appointment. And I said, thank you, but I have an engagement. And even the person I went to dinner with, when I told them, they said, you could cancel on me. I go, no, I don't cancel.
Yeah.
If I cancel an appointment or I don't attend to an event and I say I'm going to, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It's just put on your calendar, do 4 or 5 things a year and go. Meet
Sure.
people, say hi, support the organization. Just do it.
Yeah.
You'll
They're
you'll be
fun.
glad you did.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. This
You're
was
welcome,
awesome,
Jake.
man. I appreciate your time.
All right, buddy. Have a great day.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Cool.